At least 1,000 people in the UK with epilepsy die every year, many of them young people. Half of them die suddenly and unexpectedly, and no other cause can be found. My guest today says many of these deaths could and should be prevented. I'm journalist Angela Walker, and in this podcast, I talk to inspirational people and discuss underreported issues. My guest today founded a charity after the sudden death of her partner in 1990. She was determined to reduce the number of deaths from epilepsy. Her name is JaneHanna. Jane, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Angie.
No problem at all. It's great to talk to you. We've all heard of epilepsy, but sudden unexpected death in epilepsy isn't something we hear about very often. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Sadly, I have personal experience of it, but every week there are at least 21 families who share this experience. It's really where someone who has been diagnosed with epilepsy or has experienced sort of seizure-related episodes, which are subsequently diagnosed as epilepsy, die out of the blue. Usually this happens at night. Usually the person's appears very well, sort of the day before or in the lead up to the death, but they die suddenly, and it's obviously a complete and utter devastating shock. I mean, I think any parent will know the fear of a cot death. And in a sense, the epilepsy-related deaths, the SUDEP deaths are like that, in the sense of just that traumatic suddenness of the person no longer sort of there. And the SUDEP, which has been worked on for many years now, that will be put down, should be put down, sort of where there is an investigation after the death, which essentially rules out other causes. So usually we'll rule out any cardiac related cause. Essentially it's where the post-mortem comes back and the person has really just had epilepsy, and quite often there'll have been some seizures, maybe one in the year before, or maybe many more in the lead up to the death. And that's when the death will be put down as sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. Yeah.
And when you say, people are dying in the night, do you mean that they would have a seizure in the night and then die as a result of that? Or are they literally passing away in their sleep?
Well, really, it is a passing away in the sleep, and the person who died will not have been aware, and that's really important for families to know. There has been a big study done across the world where these deaths have been witnessed sort of on video telemetry units in hospitals, and so what we know is that there is a cardiorespiratory mechanism which leads sort of up to the death. The deaths are associated with seizures. So yes, the deaths are linked to seizures, but there does not need to actually, you don't need to have actually seen in a way the evidence of a seizure. You don't need to have the physical markers of the seizure necessarily, because we also know, for example, from these video telemetry units that sometimes people have silent seizures. And the recordings have been able to pick those up. So, for example, someone who has a type of seizure, generalized tonic-clonic seizure, someone who will have had one of those seizures in the 12 months before the death will be 27 times more at risk of sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. So there's this strong association with seizures, but many of these deaths are unwitnessed.
In a minute, we'll talk about preventative measures that people with epilepsy can and should be taking and some guidance for that. But first of all, I mean, you set up SUDEP Action. It was by a different name then, wasn't it? But following your own loss. Would you tell us about that, Jane?
Yeah, my first partner, Alan, was a young lawyer. He was a keen sportsman, and in the 7 months before he died, his first episode was actually he was driving his car down the A34 to Winchester, and he was triggered by some flashing the trees, sunlight in the trees, and that was his first episode. And his car just flipped over because he actually had a seizure, and he ended up in A&E. And after that, he had 4 seizures in total. He came out of the accident unscathed, actually, and but he did go on to have these 4 seizures, and on the last seizure, he died in the night. Um, and But really, when he went to the doctors at the time, when he saw the GP, and then eventually saw a specialist, and it was very much, this was something not to be worried about at all. No risks were mentioned, and really, he was discharged actually while he was still not seizure free from the specialist. However, we had learnt to live, I suppose, with okay, this is okay. But then when he died, it was a total and utter devastating sort of shock. And when I rang, you know, organizations. I tried to find out, sort of how could this have happened. And I was actually told that people couldn't die from epilepsy. And that was the beginning of my journey, really, because I realized that these deaths weren't visible at all. There was no recognition to them even happening.
So that was quite some time ago, and you've carried on with your work for SUDEP Action. Um, how are things now? Because your partner's death was in 1990. You would have thought things would have come a long way since then. What are your concerns about sudden death in epilepsy now, then?
I think after 30 years, I think it's common really with lots of causes, isn't it, and movements. You know that it takes decades to actually feed through to the kind of changes that will actually sort of stop lives. And you learn about all the barriers that are put in the way of actually the actions happening to stop the loss of life. And so, in terms of how things are now, um, the we knew before the pandemic that epilepsy deaths, in fact, all deaths from neurology, were rising before the pandemic, when all other deaths were actually reducing. And we know from the evidence that with epilepsy, it was the young deaths. These are very, very premature deaths. They're young people. And we also know that people are dying 3 times more at risk in deprived communities. We also know that, we've had a doubling of maternal deaths. A really startling statistic that the national surveillance body's never seen before, that kind of doubling of a trend of deaths in mums and their unborn, which is really concerning. And we're also seeing that people with learning disability and epilepsy are dying 10 years younger than people with learning disability with any other comorbidity, and it's a leading cause of death in people with autism. So I suppose it's hopeful in a sense that we have those statistics, because when I started 30 years ago and I joined arms with 4 other women who founded the charity, we had nothing. We had no knowledge We had a world that didn't even give any visibility at all to these deaths. So now actually we have all the statistics really we need actually to show that there is a supreme public health inequality here. There is a systemic inequality. And that the worst case scenario of that is that we have at least 21 people dying each week who are young. And I've learned that really, until the officialdom and until the media and the public sort of wake up to this, that the deaths will continue to happen. So in a sense, it's in one way quite depressing, but there is something which is about bearing witness. Epilepsy has been a very discriminated against condition for ever since it was recognized, back in the time of the Greeks. It's one of the oldest conditions known to us, and yet it is one of the most neglected conditions. So the community is it's very resilient in a sense, because the community has come through gross discriminations over the years, and it's only in recent years that people with epilepsy have been accorded basic human rights.
Do we know what's going on in somebody's brain when they have an epileptic seizure?
Yeah, it's really, really straightforward, actually. I mean, you sort of have it's a little bit of electricity that goes off in the brain. So it will happen to 1 in 20 of us in our lifetime. Just a little bit of chemistry in the brain that sparks off, and depending where it sparks off in the brain will depend in a way what your body does. So there are over 40, well over 40 different types of seizures and epilepsies, and they range from where someone might look like they're in a daydream, and to the example of the seizure where the whole body is convulsing, because it's a generalized seizure across the brain. So the whole body convulses, the person will fall down and be unconscious. And I suppose that's the type of seizure that people are most familiar with. But there are all sorts of different seizures, and so that's why it's really important that people are able to get the attention they need if they have a seizure, so the right diagnosis can be given and the right treatment can be given, and actually they can get on with their lives.
And I know that you're concerned about the way that the medical community are dealing with epilepsy. What are your concerns about that?
Our organisation could not have founded without champion researchers and clinicians who came alongside to say this was a thing, and actually we need to define SUDEP, we need to do the research, we need to know the risk factors, and we need then to do the interventions to save people. So we have very strong relationships with clinical and research teams. There has, however, one would have to say that there has been a cultural attitude towards epilepsy, and that whilst that is changing, that has changed dramatically since I've been involved. But we're still not quite in the place that other conditions are, in terms of, if you have asthma, if you have diabetes, if you have these well-established conditions in the community, you will actually be seen by somebody who in the community who will check in on you, and you will be given information sort of about the condition, about the risks, and actually what you can do to help keep safe and be well.
So,
And we haven't got there yet. We haven't got there yet, sort of, for epilepsy.
so you're talking really about management of the condition from the sounds of it. So talk me through it. What happens at the moment if somebody's diagnosed as having epilepsy? What's the kind of how are they managed in the medical community?
Okay, well, if we start with the UK and actually just think about someone, first of all, has a seizure that's suspected as being potentially epilepsy. Well, I know, for example, with a lot of the colleagues I work with, that that person might wait 12 months to actually be referred for a diagnosis. So that would be the first thing that we really need to sort out, because, you know, we wouldn't do that for a heart attack. We
Gosh,
wouldn't
12
do
months
that
is
for
a
a
long
stroke.
time, isn't it? You could have multiple seizures in that 12-month period.
Yeah, you could die. And
Mm.
actually, that's what's happened, through the pandemic. So we've been alongside families, where the deaths have happened while they're waiting to be diagnosed. So that is a real concern, that we have to increase the workforce for people with epilepsy. There needed to be a work plan decades ago, and we need to catch up with that. And epilepsy needs to be included in the government's work on major conditions.
So who's most at risk from sudden death from epilepsy?
We have a SUDEP and seizure safety checklist and an EPSMON app, which include the latest science. It sort of brings the expertise to the tip of knowledge for any professional working with people with epilepsy, and also for people with epilepsy and their families. Anyone over 16, and it's young adults who are most at risk of SUDEP, can access this information directly. And we're looking at risk factors like, what type of epilepsy do you have? Do you experience generalized tonic-clonic seizures? Those types of seizures do carry a heightened risk of SUDEP. If someone's experiencing seizures which don't involve convulsions, then they're likely their conversation with their doctor is actually going to be, actually, there's no risk. If you're having dangerous types of seizures, these are the people who need the urgent attention and support in order to keep safe. If people are having nocturnal seizures, then those nighttime seizures also increase your risk. So there are things you can do. There are ways to keep safe and to keep well. But it can only happen if these risks are actually recognised. If someone is going into accident in emergency, so presentation accident in emergency is a risk factor. We know that from the population-based research we've done. If somebody's mental health is suffering, someone's experiencing depression, anxiety.
So it sounds like we need to be understanding the risks, but also maybe there needs to be a change in protocol. If somebody has a seizure, they go to A&E. It shouldn't end there. What should happen then, do you think?
Yeah, well, there's been a really big report that we called for, and we've been part of the National Confidential Inquiry into people with epilepsy presenting to accident and emergency, and it really found that there was no system. So people were going into accident and emergency, and then they were leaving accident and emergency, and in a lot of places, risk was not recognised and was not being managed. It wasn't going anywhere, and it wasn't being picked up. So what we really need is for the local NHS and the local social care to include epilepsy in its strategic plans. So there's a lot of local systems that have been working on what gets included. And so we want epilepsy included as this poorly served community, and where it makes huge sense, because we really, if we can, seizures are a major reason why people go into A&E. So why don't we keep them out of A&E and actually sort of help people and support them in the community? To help the local NHS do that, we need the government also to recognise that epilepsy should be included in long-term conditions. Really, neurology should be included. We shouldn't just be concerned about the neck down. We should be concerned as a society about, conditions that affect our brain as well. And epilepsy is the one that perhaps presents the most acutely in terms of sudden death, and is particularly impacting these young deaths. So we need the system to recognise, and we need it to connect with the medical teams, to connect with the patient sector, the voluntary sector, connect with our organisation. Because if we connected everything up, we would be able to do amazing things. And actually, the voluntary sector's got a huge amount to give, and really to help people, because we've got the understanding of lived experience within our voluntary sector. We're able to do co-production, which actually means that people living with the condition and their families have their needs and their concerns identified and worked with. But they can't do it without the expertise. We need the expertise of the doctors. We need the pharmacists, the GPs, just to be aware of risk. They don't need to know all the ins and outs of epilepsy. That's impossible. But they need to know enough about, is somebody at risk, and do I need to escalate this?
But, I would always have assumed that medical professionals would have a basic understanding of epilepsy and the risks. So are you saying that that's not the case?
Not every doctor that would be trained would not have that training on SUDEP and risk, no. And the same with pharmacy, who are managing drugs and just, helping patients with medications, which is the first line of defense against SUDEP. They would also not have that training. So this is really where we need the safety net of knowledge. And it's very difficult to suddenly train everybody. And it's also very difficult to help professionals to keep particular things in mind, because particularly in the community, they're dealing with everything, aren't they? They're dealing with every single health condition. So that's why we've innovated the working with research and evidence, and working with people with epilepsy. We've developed digital solutions. So the Epsilon app, for example, you don't need to remember. All you need to do is actually look at the checklist, ask the patient, use the app, suggest the patient uses the app, and that's it. It's actually quite simple in terms of that awareness of risk. Then the rest of it follows, because then whatever each person needs is going to be different. But the system will be able to at least respond to that, because they'll not be in the dark. And that's really what we want to change.
The app sounds useful because it means that it sounds like medics wouldn't have to have a great deal of training. They would just need to know that they need to refer to this app in the circumstances of dealing with someone with epilepsy or someone who's had a seizure. So that sounds like a good step forward. Does it gather information as well, the app? Does it help to give you information about how many people are having seizures and so forth?
Yes. So there are 5,000 people sort of registered with the app, and they've consented. And because of that, we've been able to do research on with 2,300 women, for example, who are using the app to sort of better understand their understanding of information, their understanding of the communications that they need in order to make the choices that are vital to them in their care. So there's huge potential with the app and with the checklist. The checklist is embedded in GP systems already, most of them, so they can just use it. We'd managed to do that through the pandemic. So So these solutions are really important, and they're really a gift. They're a gift from all the bereaved families. So these developments have been funded over the years by really the families who don't want other families to be in the same position that they are, and to enable people to have choices. So it's a not-for-profit app, but it's recommended by NHS Right Care. It's recommended by Embrace, who've looked at all the maternal deaths. It's been sort of recommended with the learning disability deaths. So it's something. It's not everything. It's just a little bit of a contribution to lift awareness, so that when the person is in front of the doctor or the pharmacist or whoever, they can just show the wheel and say, okay, well, this bit's out of kilter or this bit's out of kilter. How are you going to help me get this help? Because sometimes it might not be to go to a neurologist. It might be actually they need the help of the mental health support team. It's about where they need to go next, and that's the bit that can help. We've just had a major investment in the app, so there was a fantastic family who cycled from London to Achill on the west coast of Ireland.
Wow.
They were near retirement, never cycled before. Did it last summer with 21 of their friends, and they raised a really significant amount of money, so that we're actually now able to work on phase 2 of the app to make it even more accessible and useful to all the people that use it, and that will also enable us to do really valuable research.
That's great news. Tell me a little bit more about this worrying rise in maternal death. Give me some figures, and also tell me what you think is behind it, because I know you've got concerns about a particular anti-seizure medication and its link with women not taking their medication. Tell me a bit about that.
So the maternal deaths doubled, so that, in the period 2016 to 18, there were 19 deaths of women, and the national surveillance report was very clear that in all these deaths there were major medicines issues, and there were women who'd stopped their medication. There were women on reduced medication, substantially reduced medications, and the Embrace report itself sort of highlighted a concern about whether and recommended that women must be given specialised communications, counselling about risk. And it was in that context that they sort of recommend the use of the app. SUDEP Action, we have a death register, not just SUDEP, but all epilepsy-related deaths, and we have reports from over 1,000 families, detailed reports, and 19 of the reports we have since 2016 are in women who've died during pregnancy with their unborn. So we're about to sort of publish the research on those women. We know from working on deaths, so every year we work on about 77 inquests every year, and we know from that work individual deaths and how women have not been accessing that information about SUDEP, that person-centred information about what risks they're at, and the risk to the unborn, because clearly there's a risk to the unborn, and that is really concerning, because if you
But
don't
why aren't women getting this information?
well, it's also the case that women are not all women are getting the information about the side effects of medicines as well. And if you look across the country, there's just not the resources that have been put into preconception counselling and sort of ongoing counselling. So we get back to that problem that I was talking about at the start, which is it's a poorly served community which has not had the resources that it needs. And so that makes it difficult to systematically make sure that every single woman would get information about their condition, about the risks of that condition, about their options, what are your best options, and what are your choices. And as medicine is the first line of defense against seizures and against deaths and going into A&E, it's obviously critical that information is there alongside all the information about medicines and side effects. And of course, we do know with women, and if we look at a particular drug, sort of valproate, we know that valproate, has significant risks of harm to the unborn. And so this is not an easy thing. But however, we also know that valproate is the most effective drug we have for women who have generalized tonic-clonic seizures that are the most dangerous seizures. So we know that from clinical trials. And the big problem we have is that it's going to take some years before there is any better medication, better medications which have equal effectiveness and don't have big problems with their safety profile in relation to the unborn at the same time. And that's the problem we've got. We don't have an easy solution. Sorry.
I mean, if a woman wants a child and she has epilepsy, what can she do? Because clearly having seizures is extremely dangerous for her and the unborn child, but sodium valproate could lead to birth defects. So what can a woman in that situation do? What are her options?
Well, if they are accessing like a specialist midwife, or a specialist who understands the medications, there are always options. One of the problems is where you have a policy or an approach to people with epilepsy, men or women, because actually this is a policy that's going to extend to men. The problem is that if you treat a population as permanently reproducing from a 9-year-old child through to a 55-year-old woman or man, and you sort of say that a drug is bad, people shouldn't be on it, we've got to be very mindful that there are going to be deaths and there are going to be A&Es and there's going to be children not at school and there's going to be people who lose their driving licenses and can't work. So that's why ultimately it's sort of about whose decision is it? Is it the state's decision?
Well, it sounds like,
is it the person, like it would be for any other health condition?
so it sounds like people need. It sounds like what you might be saying is people need a bespoke plan. So a drug that's dangerous for a pregnant woman is not necessarily dangerous for, a middle-aged man. So are you saying that this sodium valproate has been tarnished, its reputation has been tarnished, and so people who would benefit from it are dying because they're not taking that drug? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, we need to sort of look at the deaths really closely, and we need to look at the learnings from deaths that are coming through inquests, to learn lessons where we find that people, are dying who have not been sort of offered valparate, and have not been offered options, because of course you've got to remember, for a woman, there are lots of decisions, aren't there? There's decisions about whether you want to have a child, whether you don't want a child, when you might have a child, whether it's really important to have a birth child, or whether you might wish to adopt, or do you know, there's actually quite a lot
Mm.
of choices that women could have, but they're not necessarily going to have those conversations if they don't actually appreciate what the benefits of medicines are
Sure.
relative to the harms of medicines. And so it has to be person-centered, it has to be bespoke to their particular condition.
Is sodium valproate only dangerous while you're taking it, or could a woman take it and then stop taking it for a period while she had her children?
So this is where a specialist midwife would be able to talk through all of those and create a plan. And absolutely, there are lots of options. And I know that because we work really closely with the specialist sort of midwives and specialist doctors. So we know that there are many, many options that can be explored.
Mm.
But it can only happen if there is this counselling, if there is the resource in the system to have those conversations with
Mm.
women.
Now, I know you mentioned previously, I know you mentioned previously to me that not all deaths related to epilepsy are registered as such, and that's something that you're very concerned about, because I guess if someone dies as a result of epilepsy and it doesn't go down on their death certificate, then that's really skewing the data. So tell me a bit about what's going on and your worries there.
So when we started, deaths were just put down as anything, and quite often they were put down as unascertained, and that means that you're really denying the existence of the person who's died. There's no value sort of put on them. There's no value put on the prevention of future deaths. So that improved hugely, after we got things going, and sort of changed the worldview on epilepsy deaths and SUDEP. And here in the UK, we got pathology guidance in 2006, which set out for pathologists and coroners what to do if somebody dies who has epilepsy. Um, so that was a great move forward, and we did see improvements on recordings of deaths. However, my team, as I say, we work on 77 inquests in a year, and so it's really quite common for us to see deaths in people with epilepsy being put down as that the heart has stopped and the pathology guidance aren't used. There was a really important case in the Midlands about the death of a young man called Clive Tracy, and the family fought for 4 years to get recognition of how he died and what the actions needed to be to prevent future deaths. And SUDEP Action was able to go in with the evidence we have so that Clive's death could count. And there is now really good work going on in the Midlands area on patient safety, which has actually been shortlisted for a prize by the Health Service Journal. So I think that sort of shows you that the real importance of having the death counted is that you can actually change and make improvements to keep people safer.
20 deaths a week. I mean, if people, If 20 people were being shot every week, I mean, people will be outraged. It's a really high number, especially if, as you say, a lot of those deaths are preventable.
Yes, it's 21, and conservatively, as I say, when we did the national surveillance, we were able to show 2 decades ago that there were 42% that were potentially avoidable. We've got so many more improvements now, and we know from other research that the potential for stopping deaths is much higher. And as you say, it's 21 a week, but it's all to do with visibility. And you're right, if these were 21 mainly young people who died suddenly in a week, and we could see them all dead in the street somewhere, everyone would be all over it. But because these deaths happen in people's homes, and they happen all over the UK in different places, and they pop up as small sort of media reports in different places, they don't, the public never really gets to see the visibility of this and see the impact on the families. We've done the research with the families, so we've got the evidence that the harm to families, the trauma to families, is lifelong. We have many families that have been with us for decades, and we have hugely inspirational people who have somehow been resilient against that, and against the invisibility, against the system not really recognising, not really including epilepsy. You've got inspirational families who have done everything in their power to move things forward in spite of that. But they shouldn't have to fight. They shouldn't. They should be allowed to grieve and to pay tribute to, to celebrate that life, which they do. So the families do celebrate the real positivity and contribution of the people, to this world. But they have to fight all this hard stuff as well. And it really has to stop. We really need our culture to change and to really embrace learning the lessons from death and doing the simple things first, the basic things that could do a lot to improve lives.
In a nutshell, what would you like to see done now?
Around sort of the whole of the UK, I would really like to see every community sort of being supported, so that the simple stuff, that where somebody has a seizure, that immediately that is picked up in a community by someone who has enough knowledge in order to help that person navigate, help that person to advocate, to really get the best they can for themselves, so that really, 7 out of 10 people, they should be seizure free. There shouldn't be an issue. And though that needs to happen, so that people can just get on with their lives. That's what we'd like to see. We'd like to see, our risk tools just being used, people being told about them so they can use them, so they can really sort of advocate for themselves. We would like bereaved families, when there is a death, we would really like people to listen, and there to be learning after a death. We see systems now, and they sort of say, we'll only listen, we'll only look at this if you can tell us that this is negligence. And, if we're in a society now where we're actually sort of saying to bereaved families who are in pain, in trauma, you've got to get lawyers, you've got to sue before we'll actually start looking at lessons, that's a really sad state of affairs. So we're fighting back against that. We would like to see humanity. We would like to see families being given the choices so they can get the specialist counselling, they can get the support for inquests, they can get involved in research, they can get involved in the cause in a really positive way, so that there's hope. And we really don't want families caught up in litigations, which last for years
Of
and
course.
which
It
cause huge
sounds
harm.
like investment in, I mean, really, it's about prevention, and it sounds like an education issue and a management issue to prevent these deaths in the first place, rather than managing the way that these deaths are dealt with. If they could be prevented up front, obviously that's the number one priority, surely.
It is the number one priority, but what we've found over the years is that actually what does prompt improvements in local places is where, sadly, there is the worst case has happened. Really, it shouldn't have happened, and that's when we get, for example, the system investing in, we need more specialist nurse, we need another specialist nurse. We need to do training, we need to use the checklist, and so that's why the learning from deaths is important, because when people see a young person, a vibrant young person, or a person with learning disability vibrant as well in their community that could have been doing all sorts of contributions, they're shocked. Actually, they are shocked, and they do get motivated by those individuals, and so that's why they're connected, and that's why certainly the charity works in a very holistic way. So the engine room for change, does come from the bereaved families, as well as from the research teams and the clinicians, and from people with epilepsy. But we would like a world really where it'd be very easy for people with epilepsy to stand up and to have the information they need and get the support so that they can get the treatment, and they can just get on with all the marvelous things that they can do to contribute to our society.
Which they can do if they get their condition under control.
Yeah.
And they can get their condition under control if it's managed by the medical community properly, from the sound of it.
Yeah, as I say, there's been report after report after report. When I did the Action audit in 2002, there'd already been 6 national reports. Been lots of reports since 2002. And the problem is that we just get caught up in this paperwork trail. And the charities get invited to be part of all sorts of initiatives, at a national level. But the action on the ground, we don't see. And, that sort of has to stop. And that can only stop by actually having epilepsy included in strategic planning. There have to be the levers to actually make things happen. And to, a lot of the clinicians that go into epilepsy are, some of they're very, very motivated. They're very, very caring. It's not a popular area to go into. And, they've gone into this area because they really want to make things better for people with epilepsy, but they often work in systems which really treat epilepsy as like bread and butter. They don't really take it terribly seriously. And that's what the Chief Medical Officer said in 2002. He said, this is the problem. It's just not taken seriously in the way that it should be. And that's why we're talking about this being a public health crisis in a way. It's about inequalities. It's about that. And so that has to be recognised and worked on. And we won't, if we were to do all this, we're not going to stop all the deaths, because some people will die from the condition in the same way that people die from other conditions. And we need more research to improve the chances of people with epilepsy, including people with rare forms of epilepsy and genetic epilepsies, where there might be, cures in the future. But what we have to do is the here and now. We can't have, more and more years of just saying the same. It's at least 21 deaths a week. As a charity, it's heartbreaking, really, to see the deaths come in, day out, and to, you know, be alongside those families is absolutely crucial. But there has to be a system response, and we need the sort of visibility like you're giving today, Angela. I mean, it's just fantastic, you know, to have you doing this podcast, because it just means so much to people, and we have other champion journalists who are willing to be brave, willing to actually, you know, look at something that has been, you know, isn't for some reason considered, you know, sexy enough or whatever it is, you know, to make the news. I mean, it's thank you so much.
No problem. Well, it's an important issue, and it's obviously been underreported for a long time. So I'm really happy to talk to you about it. Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My guest today has been JaneHanna, the founder of SUDEP Action. I hope you've enjoyed the show. For more information, check out my website, angelawalkerreports.com. And if you know someone inspirational that I should be talking to, or if there's an underreported issue I should be discussing, let me know. Till next time, take care.